Radfay 48, Episode 18, which includes chapters 17, 18, and 19. End of Summer, 1998. Hello, social media mites and mavens. James Homan here. In this episode, I'm combining three chapters from my memoir. They all relate to the end of summer in 1998. End of August, 1998. On Monday, August 24th, Harold had 3 more seizures, the first activity since the debulking of the GBM on July 13th. His first seizure was at a restaurant with our friends Trisha and Sally, who had taken him out to lunch while I was working. He explained to them shortly after they had all ordered that he could tell he was having another convulsion. It became the worst he's had. It began as a focal seizure, meaning that it originated in one specific area, his right side, but it soon became a general seizure throughout his entire body. He bit his tongue, lost consciousness, and began turning blue before the paramedics arrived after a call to 911. This lasted all of 5 minutes, according to Sally and Tricia, who did all the right things with the help of total strangers and the staff in the diner. Tricia called me at the office about 2:30 p.m. to say the paramedics were on their way to the restaurant and to ask if I wanted him taken to either Mount Sinai Emergency Room or NYU's. It had been our experience that we were treated better at Mount Sinai. Dr. Gruber's office at NYU had been repeatedly difficult to contact, difficult to get to respond to phone messages, and had left us standing in a hallway outside a locked waiting room door for 40 minutes because of vacation leave, staffing problems, and their resulting consequences. And of course, having our friend Dr. Cynthia Caroselli as the clinical director of neuroscience and restorative care centers certainly helped. The ambulance sped off to the east side, and half an hour later, Sally and I met Harold in the ER. He was fully conscious when I arrived and more than a little freaked out by what he could remember. But even more by what he couldn't remember. Blood and urine were taken and tested. Another EKG and CT scan without contrast were both done, as well as a chest x-ray. He had a fever of 103 degrees and complained about not being able to urinate. A Foley catheter was inserted and almost an entire bag was immediately filled with fluid. It was suspected that he'd had a urinary tract infection. Later that evening, while lying in the ER bed, he had another general seizure while a different neurologist, Dr. George Foster, was examining him. It was discouraging to watch Harold attempting to exert control while experiencing such an extremely uncontrollable force of nature. Again, he experienced a loss of consciousness for about 4 minutes. A third seizure took place that night at approximately 11 o'clock. Alan and I were with him in the ER. This was again a focal seizure located only on his right side. He did not lose consciousness, and it lasted for almost 2 minutes. About 11:15 p.m., we were sent up to room 107 on 8 West of the Guggenheim Pavilion at Mount Sinai. The nursing staff remembered our 2 previous visits and welcomed us warmly. All 3 convulsions were probably a function of the fact that Harold's steroid, Decadron, was being titrated by Dr. Gruber. Harold's blood had been monitored daily. We had been told that while his white blood cells and platelets were dropping, they were not in any dangerous range, and in fact both could bounce back up by the next morning, given the medication he was taking. His catheter was removed and he was voiding regularly without any major difficulty or discomfort. I had been assured by Dr. Forster that the medical staff at Mount Sinai maintained necessary communication with Dr. Gruber's office at NYU, keeping everyone up to date with all actions being taken. I had personally taken the 12 thalidomide capsules to the hospital every evening to ensure that Harold's experimental protocol was not interrupted. Returning to the NYU Medical Center for his second injection of carboplatinum on September 4th, Harold became irritable and on frequent occasions had flown into tirades of understandable frustration and anger. I attempted to explain to those friends who had so generously offered their time in staying with him while I had to be at the office that this was a result of the medication he's taking and therefore rather kind of irrational. For myself, however, I believed his behavior was totally, absolutely rational. Could anyone, given Harold's circumstances, react any differently? Unfortunately, Harold's outbursts frequently packed an unintentional emotional impact that couldn't help but hurt deeply. We had hit a patch of turbulence. However, the good news was that this upset seemed to be subsiding, and the next day Harold was discharged. The carboplatinum/thalidomide results weren't going to be available until the next MRI is ordered in early October. So there was no news on that front to report to date. Courage, as my friend Wendy would always tell me. And we continued forward. End of summer. Dear friends, as we progressed, our lives became more complicated. We realized that at this point in our journey, our focus needs to shift from the patient to the caregiver. This change was difficult for me, but was confirmed by all medical professionals working with us. To me, it seemed absurdly egotistical until one nurse said to me, "Should anything happen to you now, he'd be totally lost." Since Harold's diagnosis, managing his care has been my primary concern. I take notes at every doctor's visit, realizing it was of primary importance to ask questions and to obtain answers. Numerous pages of notes have filled many stenopads. When he is hospitalized, I dress in suits with ties and look as professional as possible. In such, quote, corporate American drag, unquote, I even gained entrance to staff-only hospital areas as my sleuthing became more insistent. I asked for spelling of words that I'd never heard. Every patient, particularly those with a terminal diagnosis, needs a manager of their care. While asking questions may not have changed Harold's prognosis, answers to our questions would guarantee a clearer understanding of his situation. The answers became the basis on which all decisions were made. I'm sure you've heard these and other platitudes. There are no stupid questions, or 4 ears are certainly better than 2. I have learned to ask always. Should you find yourself questioning anything, should you or I misstep outside the parameters of professional concern or ask inconvenient questions, we will certainly be reminded. Understandably, Harold is in a hyper-emotional state, and at times he's unable to communicate clearly or recall details about what the doctors may have said. It has become essential to speak with doctors directly in order to understand what is going on or to ensure that the right questions were asked. Should I not be able to attend his appointments because of my full-time work schedule? Last week, I had a work conflict that I couldn't reschedule. Alan volunteered to escort Dr. Harold to Dr. Gruber's office. Harold's second carboplatinum injection had been scheduled for September 10th, 1998, and I couldn't work around a work conflict. I armed Alan with 3 pages of questions and concerns. Alan returned from the visit with answers to every question I'd written down. She also left a note saying, "Dear James, Dr. Gruber and his staff wanted to know what you do, what your job is. I told them that you were an executive assistant at Ogilvy One Worldwide. They told me they'd never observed such detailed attention from any caregiver they had ever worked with. They all assured me that my brother is in very good, if not exceptionally capable hands. Thank you, James. Mom and I, as well as the rest of the family, are all very grateful. Love, Alan." Well, while I appreciated Alan's kindness as well as the staff's praise, I wondered who wouldn't step up to the responsibilities for such a great guy. I fortunately have organizational skills in my DNA, and I was being tested in those skills being used effectively. With much love, always, JLH. Good news. Dear friends, Harold had his first MRI since beginning the carboplatinum/thalidomide trial on August 7th. In comparing today's MRI with that of the MRIs of July 14th, the day after the tumor's debulking, Dr. Gruber informed Harold and me that, in his opinion, the size of the GBM hadn't changed a great deal, if at all. The size of the tumor in the 2 MRIs looked a lot, if not remarkably, similar. Neither of us expected to hear such good news. Is this our second miracle? Will Robin Williams play Harold in the movie version? These and other questions have yet to be answered. In fact, Harold and I have realized that the only answers of which either of us can be certain are those we find in our respective souls and or within each other's eyes. Dr. Gruber also reduced Harold's steroid Decadron dosage to 2 milligrams and then to 0 milligrams a day for next Thursday. We will be glad that he'll soon be off those horrid drugs. However, please know that in spite of the good news, Harold has experienced varying degrees of, how can I describe this? Pharmacological hell, the details of which I will spare you. Fortunately, he can't recall those last 3 weeks of August through the Labor Day weekend. It was a weekend I would never choose to, and doubt I could ever live through again. Those last 3 weeks of August were an extraordinary strain on all of us. Harold is currently anemic. The carboplatinum chemotherapy had zapped his bone marrow significantly, of which we had been forewarned. The second red blood cell transfusion is scheduled for tomorrow morning. His hemoglobin count is only 7.6. Normal range for males is 14 to 18. And his red blood cell count is 2.66. Normal range for males being 4.7 to 6.1. With a hematocrit count of 22.7, normal range for males 42 to 52. However, Dr. Gruber assures us that Harold's weakness is a function of the treatment and not a function of the tumor. At the end of September, Harold's white blood cell count was 1.9. The normal range varies between 4.9 and 10.8. And his platelet count was only 28. Normally, the range is between 130 and 400. On September 25th, a Doppler sonogram revealed that a blood clot was causing his right ankle to swell. He was admitted to the NYU Medical Center immediately, and in addition to Coumadin being prescribed daily to thin his blood, a Greenfield filter was implanted in his groin to guarantee that present or future clots in either leg would never make their way to his brain, his lungs, or his heart. Then Harold returned home with all your good thoughts. Without your friendship, neither Harold nor I could have made it 6 months along this path. We are hoping and have been encouraged to believe that by the end of the week, Harold should be back to as close to normal as is humanly and medically possible. With much love, always, JLH. And that concludes this podcast. Please check in next week for episode 19, Family Relations. As always, thank you for your time and interest. Until next week, then, be kind, do good, be happy, and love one another, remembering to coexist with tolerance while embracing similarities and respecting differences.